all classes.
Nice.
Lydia Spencer.
I just don't.
Yeah.
All right, class. A couple people said they might be absent today because they had some church music related issues. And so that's why we are again recording the class session so that anything that they missed, they will have access to. This is Todd Tellinger, who is a faculty member and a director, I believe, of the Arts Administration Program. And I asked Todd if he could come because several of you, when you articulated either your individual learning goals or you said this is a learning goal that would be good for the whole group, expressed ideas about how do we deal with the fact that the arts don't get the sort of credit that they deserve, or how do you deal with the fact that they get sort of short shrift. So with no further ado, I hand it over to Professor Todd Dellinger, who should know some of these because he has a history as an expert arts administrator.
Yeah. I actually was, as an undergrad, I was a theater major, and I was a professional actor in classical theater at Shakespeare Theater in Washington, Arena Stage in Washington and other places. So I'd come as an artist and then someone who's been administering the arts for the last 25 years now, including teaching, while teaching here. And that question of why are the arts undervalued in education is really you know, an essential one, certainly, and essential to you guys, especially those of you who are artists that are going to be out there as working artists and educators. How do we promote ourselves and what we do as important and viable to the world? And how do institutions do the same? And in my teaching on arts administration, I really teach from a perspective of the artist. And even as administrators, I encourage the administrators to think of themselves as artists. And fortunately, many of them are here. And the understanding of why the arts are undervalued, I really think in a way starts with the artists themselves and the arts community. We as artists, those of you who are artists in the room, think about how do you value what it is that you do? How do you put a value on an hour's worth of your time performing? Somebody asks you to do a church gig or to come out and do a little workshop for somebody. And they say, well, we don't have much to pay you, but would you do it? You might get exposure or something and other people might hire you, right? And we do it, right? Yeah. We go out and do it, oftentimes for free. Because, why? We do not understand how to value ourselves. We do not hold ourselves in a high enough esteem to feel that we are of value or that our artistry is of value. Those of you who are not artists in the room, who are not artists in the room, what is your area of expertise, madam?
Science.
Science. And your area?
Science.
Science as well. How many scientists go out and a pharmaceutical company says, you know, we really would like you to work on the next great cure for cancer, or the cure for cancer. We'd really like you to do that, but we don't want to give you any money. But it's a really nice thing you'll be doing for humanity, isn't it? And maybe if you come and talk about it at one of my dinner receptions, other people in the room will pay you something eventually for saving their mother or their father. It doesn't work that way, and they never would, right? More so even than science, maybe our business colleagues would say, oh, are you kidding me? I would never show up for less than X number of dollars. Or they would go and they'd say, well, let's see, let's analyze. What does the market bear for what I'm worth? And I'm worth this within this strata or within that region or whatever. As artists, I argue that the field of the arts ourselves are as guilty, if not more guilty, for undervaluing what we do as artists and what the value is, or if not undervaluing, not understanding how to place value on. Now, if we as artists do not understand how to value ourselves and don't understand how to place a value on the art that we produce, how do we ask society then, or demand somehow that society is able to do it? Haven't you guys for hundreds of years been taking money from rich folks? You know, when they give it to you, and otherwise struggling and living in shit and thinking, well, I'm a poor artist, I'm struggling. I think we need to dispel the idea of the poor, starving artist, because we have been living the role of the poor, starving artist for hundreds of years. And why not expect that society would expect that we deserve nothing but you know, maybe a meal, maybe a warm bath. So I think part of it is, first of all, establishing value in ourselves and in value in what we do, and understanding how we go about placing a value on and a worth upon what we do, and never undervaluing what we do and stopping doing the free gigs all the time, although it's very tempting. And I know that as artists, we just do it because we do it for the passion of it, right? But we have to start treating it a little differently first in order to change the paradigm, so that those who teach the arts, or those who expect or consider whether there's art or science in the classroom, we as a field have not done a terrific job of expressing what our value is and why we are valuable. So I think that's one key thing, and that's a perspective that I teach from. And then when we look at it from artists and arts institutions and identifying, well, what's our value, I really case it in the starting point of defining what our vision is. And whether you're an individual artist or an arts institution, I think the idea of defining what the vision is really essential. And then a vision, and then what is the mission. Now, a lot of arts organizations will start talking from a point of what's our mission. The reason that they talk about what is our mission first and foremost is that during the 1980s and 1990s, there was a movement in the field of arts institutions to bring on board business consultants to help them become operate more like a business. And the idea of business doesn't really talk about vision. It's really, what's your mission? What are your values within, you know, you can have a value statement. What this vision thing has become really nearly obsolete. And one of my areas of research starting over actually now and through the summer is going to be about reestablishing the idea of vision in the arts. And I think that the idea of vision in the arts, and artists and arts institutions being able to very clearly and succinctly articulate what a vision for who they are and what they do and how it impacts the world is essential. And I think that as we begin to define what our vision of ourselves as an artist and what the vision of the arts to the greater good of humanity is, and able to articulate that in a way that is more readily digestible from the general public, I think that also is going to play into helping us define why the arts are important. I think we, unfortunately, are not very good as artists at helping to put a definition and a value around what it is that we do so that the broader society can understand it. We tend to be a little guilty of being a little too inwardly focused and not giving enough attention to what is our role in society as artists to educate those around us about the value and the importance of what we do, and what is the vision of what we do. And so I start with, when I'm doing consulting with institutions, when I'm teaching my students in arts administration, and when I talk to individual artists who they themselves, several of you may go out into the world and start your own arts company of some sort, whether it's a studio or whether it's a educational entity or whether it's going out there as a freelance artist who goes into the schools and does education. We have to define for the rest of the public what our vision of the future is. And the vision is really, how do the arts transform lives and create, I align it with the concept of religion. Religion's really good at selling vision. We think of Christianity and we have a symbol in mind, and we have gates in heaven with pearly gates, and we have golden streets and maybe an apartment with Jesus if we're lucky, right? We've got a real clear vision of what that utopian ideal world is once we've gotten to the pinnacle of the heavenly place or whatever it is. And really all religions, or most of them, are going to have similar iterations of what it is that we're striving for in this, we're toiling through life to attain in the afterlife, a perfect reward kind of concept. Well, the artists and artist institutions and scientists and other fields, defining what our vision is for an idyllic future which, if we could accomplish everything accomplishable within it, what would that bring to the world and change the world, and how would it transform lives? And what would that look like? And being able to sell that as well as a religion does, for example, we would really have a significant impact on the lives of the others whose lives we touch, and maybe also help to move the idea of why the arts are so important to the education of society and to the advancement of society. So I think establishing vision, which is the articulation of sort of an ideal heaven on earth through the arts and the transformative power of the arts and how that changes lives, and appealing to the emotion is really important, and an element which has been lost on the arts for really several decades in exchange for a much more business-like model of the mission. Now, there's the vision, but then there's also articulating the mission, which is what is our day-to-day, lifelong sort of commitment to 3 or 5 keys of, what are we willing to live and die by in order to achieve that heavenly vision? Well, if artists and institutions can begin to think of themselves in that way as sort of vessels of delivering and advancing a vision of a better world, and then having a clear mission of how they're going to go about doing that day in, day out throughout their lifetime, we start to sort of then build a construct which is more understandable perhaps and helps us articulate what's in our heads and what's in our hearts and what's coming out through our cello or through our voice into a structural way that maybe society is a little more easily digested by society, and maybe starts to turn the tide and articulate a way for society to put a value on, in that structure, what it is that you guys are striving to achieve. And those three things really, vision, mission, and finding value and understanding how to assign value to what it is that we do, are 3 key elements, I believe, in turning around a broader societal perspective on the importance of the arts to society. There's an anonymous Greek quote, they had no poets and so they died. I don't know if that's exactly what I'm paraphrasing. But, without poets, what is society? Without arts, what is society? It's as important as the sciences, and is as important as math and all of those other things that are being pushed in education these days. All right, so identifying our value and understanding and being able to recognize ourselves as vessels of an important vision for society, and that has a value to it, and no longer undercutting our own value, no longer playing the poor starving artist, poor me, I'm a starving artist. And we as an arts community need to start to change the paradigm. And then I believe that that's going to be an important force to help change the perspective in society. Another element of teaching the arts administration these days, and what is really at the forefront of our federal funding mechanism, such as it is in America for funding the arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, is Art Works. That's the catchphrase that the National Endowment for the Arts has been using for the past several years, Art Works. Recognizing the importance of the arts to the economic machine, American economic machine, and the part that the arts play in that. The realization that the nonprofit arts sector alone, not including commercial arts, the nonprofit arts sector alone is one of the larger percentages of the gross domestic product of the American economic machine than all commercial sports franchises combined. Nonprofit arts contribute more to the gross domestic product of America than all sports franchises, as commercial sports franchises combined. Isn't that interesting? Yep. Nobody would even think that. I forget what the count is, but it's like 50,000 individual nonprofit arts entities in America right now. It's a thriving sector, which a lot of people don't realize. Yes, sir?
Where does the revenue come from in that sort of model, in that nonprofit model?
Where does the revenue come from?
Yeah.
Well, the idea of a nonprofit is kind of weird, right? What business calls themselves what they are not, right? I'm not a sports company. I'm not profit is kind of weird. It's just that the profit that is made, that's another unique perspective I take in my teaching of arts administration. We are in the business of making money.
Right.
It's a question of what happens to the excess money that's made. That profit cannot be put into individual's pocket, can't go into the pockets of the board members. There aren't investors that make a benefit, but it goes back into the company.
Where does the profit,
where does the money come from?
Yeah.
So there's earned revenues, which come from things like ticket sales, fees for classes, rights and royalties for the use of the art, sale of actual pieces of art, merchandising concessions, and then there's the contributed side. usually about a 60%
what
earned
sort of
and
like what sort of
40%
institutions like comprise like these non-profits like museums and galleries?
Galleries are more of a for-profit system
Okay.
structure. Museums, theaters, regional theaters, not Broadway, regional theaters, and smaller theaters, dance companies, opera companies, all of the traditional art forms that you'd think of, independent music and music
Oh, okay.
producers, arts education entities, so it
All right.
covers a broad gamut.
So very okay.
Very broad gamut, yeah. Recognizing, one, the value of what we do and valuing ourselves as artists. Parlaying into, two, the value of what arts institutions do and how they contribute to society. Parlaying into, three, understanding and articulating a vision which other people who are non-artists can grab onto and appreciate and start to transform their thinking about the importance of the arts in society. What was I on? 4, mission, which is how do we live that vision and put a construct around what it is that we do that sort of is able to be absorbed by the broader society. And then 5, recognizing what kind of impact positive impact the arts have on things like our economy. That tends to be a little bit more tangible for folks. So if we are able to say, well, the arts do this for the economy, and therefore arts and education are important because in the long term, that's going to spin out and be positive for the economy. That's really what the front of the National Endowment for the Arts has been over the past, say, 10 years, 12 years, I forget, the appointment that Obama made shortly after his presidency. So that's another key element that I think is, again, we have to think of ourselves in a way that is not so businessy that we become a business and forget about the arts, but we do have to think about ourselves in a structural way which is more digestible to sort of the average citizen, the average sort of the norms of society or the prominent themes of society. And of course economy is right now, and economic stability and regeneration of our communities and all of that good stuff. So there is evidence out there that the arts are very strong in the economy and very positive for turning around economies on both the macro and the micro levels. So where do we find information about this kind of stuff if we're interested in filtering it into our writings and our own discussions? So if you visit the National Endowment for the Arts website, NEA.gov I believe it is, you will find a reporting segment on there where you can look up all kinds of things: economic viability of the arts, viability of the arts in education, how that parlays into broader societal issues, National Endowment for the Arts. Americans for the Arts is a major arts advocacy organization based in Washington. It's really like a lobbying organization, but they are very much in the business of collecting data and doing reporting on the impact of arts in education and how that spins out into broader sectors of society. There are a number of other sort of arts disciplinary institutions. So if we're talking about dance, or we're talking about music, or we're talking about theater, there are independent, nonprofit, arts-centric organizations, Dance USA, Theater Communications Group, there are national choral societies. So there are a number of organizations out there, typically nonprofit or government entities, that are going to give you the kind of information that you would seek to sort of justify your arguments. I'd say the 2 biggest ones would be National Endowment for the Arts and Arts, Americans for the Arts, and other arts advocacy groups on state, regional and state levels. New England Foundation on the Arts, for example, is one big regional organization which would cover not only New England but as far down as New Jersey and really as far down into Washington, D.C., which would also have those kind of statistical analyses of the impacts of the arts that we would be able to use to bolster our argument on behalf of arts and the value of arts in education. So I think one thing that we, the arts community, has to do is reframe the argument and make it tactile to our fellow citizens and begin to then say, this is why not only it's feel good and it's terrific for childhood development, and it's terrific in a whole bunch of other ways, the relationship of the arts to math and science, and the positive impacts that having a vibrant arts program in the education system is to arts, to science, to math and to science, is also proven statistically. Those kinds of data points you can find on National Endowment for the Arts and Americans for the Arts and other sources. Yeah.
Do you have any good sources for like how the arts can affect emotional or like psychological development? Like off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head right now, I know there's a lot of data out there.
Would
those would be
also
good
help?
starting points because they do have those. You'll find a bunch of different branches of research on these different sites.
Okay.
And those are two major repositories and major funding mechanisms for doing these kinds of reports. So you will find niche information on those sites about impact on childhood development, impact on how the arts impact other learning, psychological development, all those sorts of things. But I will look for specific sites and share them with your professors. I don't know, does that work for you?
Sounds great.
Do you have any questions? Okay.
All right, thank you, Todd. And you'll send my bill through the provost, right? All right, so what I want to do is just very briefly go to the, what's that? No, that's my computer. In the module.
Fine now.
See you later. It was good.
Come back whenever you're done with the class.
Okay, in the news about the arts, I've got 4 things. The New York Times music issue, I'm just going to pass this around, not last Sunday, but the one before. 25 songs that tell us where music is going. So when you think about, yes?
I wasn't sure it posted, so I posted it in discussions, and I'm not really sure whether I was expecting people to read it, but I found a really cool article called Learn Different. It was about, in the New Yorker, it's about a really alternative school based in the Bay Area where the students' curriculum is based on this, it's run by a software company.
Yeah.
The software that the students are beta testing is what's helping them learn, so it's kind of a for-profit school, and I thought it was great.
It is, it's a fascinating article. I'll pass this around. When you think about music reviews, it's a form of education. Basically, they're telling you what you should pay attention to or not pay attention to. So the electronic version of that is in the news and information stuff. Jenny's article from the New Yorker is in discussions. There's another one that says where computers defeat humans. You're probably all familiar with Big Blue, which was the IBM machine that beat a chess master, and then you're familiar with Watson, which was the IBM machine that beat the champion for Jeopardy. And so these artificial intelligent machines get smarter and smarter. So the latest one is called AlphaGo, and it's from Google, and it's a machine that beat the South Korean Go champion. And apparently, being able to beat the world's best chess champion, that was like here, beating the world's greatest Go champion is way up there, because both of them they're closed systems. There's a finite number of pieces, but the number of possibilities in Go is like exponentially much larger than in chess. So one of the things in this article, it talks about a thing called Polanyi's paradox. Polanyi was a physicist and sort of a phenomenologist who says, we know more than we can say. And what that points to is the idea is there are certain domains of knowledge that cannot be reduced to a collection of algorithms. You cannot tell how to win at Go, but basically if you load in all the great Go games into this brain, it then knows how to play Go better than anybody could tell anyone how to play Go.
Can you just give like a brief synopsis of what Go is?
Yeah, it's a game. You've got this big grid, and all you have are white and black pebbles. And what happens is you put your pebble, and if somebody can surround your white pebble with black pebble, that one goes off the board. And so the person who has most successfully surrounded most opponent pieces wins the game, and it is much more complex than chess because of the number of possibilities. So that was an interesting thing. The next one, smartasses are more creative, is a fascinating article, and I asked Alyssa if it was okay if I could out her as someone, I've identified her as a smartass early in, and I love her for it, right? But one of the premises of the article, it says sarcasm basically is conducive to creativity. So if I am sarcastic towards you, not only does it make me more creative, but it makes you more creative.
No,
Unless,
there's no way
unless you don't trust me. So it turns out they had 5 hypotheses, and one of them had to do with the fact that sarcasm can be positive if there is trust. I think of myself as someone who sort of never uses sarcasm against a student in a classroom. You 14 who've seen me working with Dr. Wilner will know I'll be sarcastic towards her, but that's because, you know, it's more of a fair fight, you know? So in any event, it's a fascinating article that I recommend looking at. And then finally, Jeffrey Hartman. Jeffrey Hartman was a literary professor of literature at Yale. He was responsible for probably starting what's called the Yale School, which is about deconstruction. So it's a recent New York Times obituary. And one of the things it'll help you understand is if you don't know what deconstruction is, and if you don't know what has been the trend in literary criticism, this very brief obituary will help you get to the bottom of that. So I just wanted to announce that those things are out there. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ambrose, who's going to do something else.
Great. We're going to have a look at complexity theory and chaos and order. So if you can just think about a preliminary question to begin with. If you don't know you're getting into a particular situation and you walk into a room and there's a group of people there, would you prefer that it be a chaotic environment or an extremely orderly environment? Orderly? Okay. One chaos and a bunch of order?
Why is that?
I'm serious, so that's what I like. I'm thinking about this word.
Well, why would somebody want a chaotic environment as opposed to an orderly one?
Because you can walk in unnoticed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Any other thoughts?
I'm not great at following rules, so I don't want to break the order of an orderly environment.
Okay.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Juan said, the first thing that came to my mind was a quote from The Great Gatsby, where, I don't know it verbatim, but he says, like, crowded parties are more intimate, yeah, and, like, if there's only, like, 3 people at the party, then you feel, like, so exposed.
Mm.
So, I think
So
there's
the
some truth to that.
crowd is going to be more chaotic just by virtue of it being a crowd? Possible? Okay. Well, we're bringing this to you because chaos theory and complexity theory apply to everything, including the arts. It's probably more to the arts than anything else, actually. But it applies to everything. And we're going to take one really simple model from complexity theory, the chaos order continuum, and see how it applies to your work. Here are a couple of other questions. What about your responses to either one of those questions or parts of one of the questions?
The first one I would say absolutely yes. It can be counterproductive because some students need a small release of energy so that they can calm down and focus. Because if you're constantly forcing them to be quiet, keep it in, you know, they're gonna want to like not focus.
That's part of the argument that Yang Zhao makes for China to be trying to catch up to us instead of us trying to catch up to them, because their system has been locked down in excessive order for a long time, and they've recognized that. Yes.
I'd say I agree about the first question, yes. It could be too, like, you can be like counterproductive by being too orderly and too predictable. But I feel like orderly and predictable are like really like kind of like contextualized when you talk about like fine art and like writing and like music.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a sense, like, there is a lot of order and predictability in something that's written or something that's drawn or something that you like write or like produce like orally. But like there's, I don't know, I guess there's a sense where you could think of that order and predictability as being like repetitive. Like, but you could also think of it as like being proper.
Okay. You're almost making me think about a blend of chaos and order.
I think order in the classroom is like almost always needed. I mean, sometimes you can have a little silliness.
Mhm.
But I mean, there's a reason that there's a teacher and there are also students because they're here to learn, but how can you be there to learn if it's all predictable? And what's the point in teaching the concept without a little bit of unpredictability? Like, what if a student asks a question that you don't know the answer to? Wouldn't you want to know the answer to that question?
Yeah.
You know?
Some teachers are going to crave having the answer all the time.
Yeah.
I think that, well, one of the problems that I experienced in high school was that my teachers would teach the same curriculum each day through several different classes, but the students in each class varied. So my teachers would have expectations after the first time they taught a lesson that day that would change the way that they would teach the classes later in the school day. And so they would always say that they liked when they taught it like the last time of the day because they were able to practice it and stuff. But I think the big problem with that is that each class is very different and the students in the class are going to learn differently and have different responses to the curriculum, and that they should have like more flexible lesson plans and things like that because the students aren't going to be the same in every class.
So you have to have some tolerance for chaos to be productive. Let's have a look at where this is coming from. Complexity theory is a really vibrant branch of interdisciplinary sciences right now. Mostly it came from the natural science like chemistry and physics, but it didn't really take off until computer technology caught up with it, until you could run simulations and do data analyses that were sophisticated enough to capture what was going on in the complex adaptive system. So they call these systems nonlinear dynamic systems or complex adaptive systems. And there is a group now, a very well-known group in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's called the Santa Fe Institute. It's made up largely of natural scientists, but there are economists and educators, psychologists, and others there doing research on these systems. And what they found is that there are patterns of behavior that transcend categories. So if you have a human mind, that's a complex adaptive system. So is the American economy. So are traffic patterns in Manhattan. So are animal population behaviors in ecosystems and chemical reactions in beakers and things like that. All of those are complex adaptive systems, but the interesting thing is they're finding similar behaviors in those systems. So a behavior in the traffic patterns of Manhattan being similar to the behavior in a human mind during an exam, for example, is a really puzzling finding. But one thing they have, one of these patterns they found that transcend all of these complex adaptive systems is that complex behavior occurs when there is a balance between chaos and order, or a blending of the two. When you go too far toward order or too far toward chaos, complexity drops away. And I'll show you that model shortly. But here's one example of it. Think about the human mind. If a human mind is too dogmatic, too locked into a particular belief system, it becomes rigidly dogmatic or ordered, excessively ordered. Like this brick wall over here. On the other side, notice how chaotic that kind of mind is. Schizophrenia, for example, a fragmented personality where one thought bounces to another, and there's not enough predictability in it to maintain any kind of order. But in between, where you have a blend of chaos and order, you have complex creativity going on. So a person who can use an idea framework, which is order, and brainstorm a bunch of ideas, which is chaos within that framework, will be generating complex thought. So here's the model, the very simple model that comes from complexity theory that applies to all complex adaptive systems. They haven't found one it doesn't apply to yet. So notice again, the horizontal dimension is oscillations between chaos and order, and the vertical dimension is complexity. The higher you go, the more complex the behavior becomes. Complexity in a complex adaptive system is generally a good thing, especially if you're thinking about kids learning. If kids are in a classroom and their learning is excessively ordered, the complexity of their thought is way, way down. They're not doing any kind of creative or critical thinking. Same thing is if there's too much chaos. So if you think about a teacher in a 7th grade classroom who is excessively ordered, who has a set of rules laminated in 1981 and they're stuck up on the wall and they're all faded out, but they're still stuck up there. And he or she is walking around with a yardstick, smacking the desks every now and then to keep the kids attentive. All the kids are sitting in rows, filling out the same page in the same workbook. And that's an excessively ordered environment. And it's not very productive. Kids aren't thinking. Same thing if you go to the next classroom and there's a teacher in there who hasn't imposed any order, and the kids are throwing spitballs at each other and hanging from the light fixtures and doing whatever they want. There's not much complexity going on there either. It's certainly not in terms of learning. But when you find that balance between chaos and order, you have an exquisite blend that leads to complexity, that leads to creative and critical thinking, and it leads to motivation. When a human mind is engaging in creative and critical thought about something, there's usually a lot of motivation that goes along with it. So, questions or comments up to this point?
Is this why, like, businesses or government kind of associations use Robert's rules so often, because it's somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, any kind of rule system will inject some order into the process.
Yeah, but it's not like so strict that you can't
Yeah,
confuse ideas.
right. There's room for movement within them, right? So yes, I would suggest that that's a good interpretation. Other thoughts? Well, let's see how this applies to the real world. We've already looked at the first row here, how an excessively ordered mind can be dogmatic and excessively chaotic mind can be schizophrenic or some other kind of fragmented condition. And mental health or creativity goes in the middle. But if you think about human creativity again, logic and reason, what philosophers highly value is making chains of logic, if this, then that, and you can prove these things. That's important, but if that's all you do, then you're lacking some necessary chaos. Intuition is the subconscious mind percolating and popping up with the odd idea that seemingly comes out of nowhere, like when you're walking in the woods, for example. So, but that's chaotic. You don't know when it's going to happen. You can't control it. But when you can blend the two, when you can move back and forth between intuition and logic and reason, get an intuitive insight, and then come in and work on it to make it better and to prove whether or not it'll work, then you've got creative intelligence happening. Now look at even the American economy or the world economy. Excessive government regulation, too much order. This kind of goes back to the example of the old Soviet Union in the mid-20th century, where they had central control over the economy. They had 5-year plans. Most of the decisions were made in Moscow, and it wasn't very efficient or effective. Kind of fell apart. It was really stagnant. The Soviet citizens back then had a saying that we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us, because their economy was pretty bad. So that was excessive order. On the other side of it, you've got economic freedom. Now, there are a lot of economists promoting this idea of economic freedom will solve everything. Let's completely deregulate the economy and let the entrepreneurs go wild. Sounds good, but if you do that too much, you end up with excessive chaos. So much so that you might end up crashing the economy, as happened in 2008. But if you can blend the two, if you can have some kind of control and regulation, but allow for a lot of economic freedom, you're going to have a good economy. Even in politics, dictatorship, where one dictator rules, is too orderly. Anarchy, where there isn't any control or insufficient control. Like in Somalia and East Africa, they've had pretty much no government for quite a long time, and chaos rules. But a blend of the two gives you a healthy democracy. Now we get to education. There's research showing that the science of teaching means what research has shown us works. So there's a bunch of how-tos in a book that you should use as a teacher. But the art of teaching is using your intuition, kind of going back up to logic and reason and intuition and the creative mind. And you end up with constructivism. The idea of kids constructing their own knowledge is the productive part in the middle. Essentialism is a philosophy of education, which means there are pieces of knowledge that kids have to learn, and they fit into these little silos like mathematics and sciences and English literature and things like that. And Summerhill was a school in Britain that was based on the philosophy of letting kids do whatever they felt they wanted to do. And it didn't work very well. It is a pretty neat idea, but there wasn't enough order in it. And constructivism, again, is the balance in the middle. This brick wall, backbone, and jellyfish comes from classroom management, which means teachers are taught how to manage kids' behavior. Barbara Colarosa is one of the experts who runs around the country doing that. And she uses these metaphors. She says a brick wall teacher is like the one I described earlier, with the laminated rules on the front and having all the kids sitting quietly in rows. And the jellyfish teacher is the one who doesn't impose any order. And the backbone teacher is the one who has balance of chaos and order, some control, but some freedom. A backbone provides structure, but allows flexibility. And then even when you go to assessment, assessing student learning, standardized testing is precise and orderly, whereas impulsive assessment, a teacher says, I have to shake out a grade, so I give kids some kind of an assignment, but there's not much thought behind it. But authentic assessment is having them do a real world process. It provides motivation and order with some freedom inside it. Let's take a few minutes, if you'd break into small groups and go back to the chaos order continuum and tell each other stories about when you've experienced excessive order, when you've experienced excessive chaos, and when you've been in the middle, when you've had this rush of productivity that seems motivating, and it's not perfectly orderly and it's not chaotic, but it's kind of a blend of the two. If you can break into teams and give that a try.
What do you got, James?
Oh, I
Yeah, what do you got?
times where I've had too much order. I couldn't think specifically. I never took the SAT. ACT.
Wow, you're shaking.
Well, how about all of high school?
What was that dirty look?
Actually, more like middle school.
I was thinking about how
Yeah.
How was it?
Really?
I was trying to make the order is. I was like, yeah.
I like order as
In a small group where you're like trying to
All right. No, I had a series on the metal, so.
but no, I
Former.
definitely some sort of.
Of what party?
Well, I had,
I
think we're about
But-
all
Chaos is
like
a strong word. Order is just not a strong word.
if I used to teacher in like
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, like, I'm just saying.
you could not control the class.
Depending on the appropriate, I'm not saying
It was
teachers
just
or
like
anything like
crazy,
that, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, it can have
we
some
did
sort of
it,
experiment.
we actually.
Yeah, it was great.
I
It was pretty
thought
cool. In
about
classroom.
or
Like we.
that's
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Like we literally
Which is
put
why
an orange and black bag, she wrote on
too
the
much
seat.
fun.
When I write a paper.
She
That's
brought in.
hilarious. Any student I know knows Asian in general.
That's the same thing with
Even
me.
put on this
I don't even remember, but she was just like,
That's so funny.
like she
That's
didn't
so
teach and we would just like go to that class and she'd like hand out a plate.
Like,
I don't know, I have.
choir rehearsal, you could say so many different things.
That was in like.
It's so broad.
Extremely.
Seven, I think
That's
it's
why it
seventh
fits
grade.
everything.
It was like a
So
bio,
it's very,
like biology.
it's so broad that it's
department.
confining.
So we just learned.
It's like, what's a good example to bring up? Because anything's a good example.
Well,
You could say sitting, you could say
it's like,
taking a
like
class.
the frog guys.
Like the way you operate in class.
Aren't there times when you have done
Yeah.
either academic
And
or
it was
other
already
things
like
like
in
that?
formaldehyde.
That
You
have-
could talk about so many different aspects of the general, like, you talk about
You mean on the
sitting in the rehearsal, you can talk about the rehearsal itself.